When we first moved into Maplewood Acres, I thought I'd hit the jackpot. The house was cozy, the neighbors seemed friendly, and the backyard had just enough space for my dream project, a fish pond. It wasn't anything fancy, but it quickly became my happy place. There's something calming about watching water ripple under the sun, while colorful fish swim lazily beneath the surface. Every evening after a long day at work, I'd grab a cup of tea and sit by the pond. It was my little slice of peace. At first, everything felt perfect. Our neighborhood looked like it came straight out of a magazine. Neat lawns, flower beds bursting with color, and quiet streets where kids could ride their bikes safely. But soon, I started noticing one particular neighbor more than the others. Karen. She lived in the house next door, and if there was an award for most involved neighbor, she would have won hands down. Karen was always outside, either inspecting everyone's yards or chatting up the mailman. At first glance, she seemed nice enough, though her constant hovering made me uneasy. Karen wasn't just any neighbor. She was on the Homeowners Association, HOA, board. You know what that means. Rules. Lots of them. Rules about lawn height, fence colors, even holiday decorations. Most people followed these guidelines without much fuss, but Karen took things to another level. She didn't just enforce the rules, she lived for them. And unfortunately for me, my fish pond apparently broke some unspoken code. It all began innocently enough, with notes. Little slips of paper tucked under my door or left on my porch railing. Your pond needs cleaning, one read. Another said, the waterfall noise is disruptive. Disruptive? To whom? My goldfish? Still, I tried not to let it bother me. After all, maybe I was being too loud. Maybe my pond did need tidying up. So I cleaned it, adjusted the water flow, and hoped that would be the end of it. But Karen wasn't satisfied. Her complaints kept coming, each note more pointed than the last. One morning, I found a flyer taped to my gate. Ponds are unsightly and attract mosquitoes. Consider removing yours. Unsightly. That stung. My pond wasn't just a random feature. It was part of my home, part of who I was. Who gave her the right to decide what belonged in my yard? Despite my frustration, I tried reasoning with her. I knocked on her door one afternoon, hoping to clear the air. But instead of listening, Karen launched into a lecture about property values and community standards. Her tone was clipped, almost robotic, as if she were reciting lines from the HOA handbook. When I finally walked away, I realized something important. Karen wasn't going to back down. Ever. That realization should have scared me, but oddly, it made me feel stronger. If Karen wanted to fight, fine. But she had no idea who she was messing with. What she saw as a harmless pond, I saw as my sanctuary. And nobody, not even Karen, was going to take that away from me. Little did I know, this was only the beginning of a battle neither of us could have predicted. The morning it happened, I woke up to an eerie silence. Normally, the soft hum of the waterfall in my pond greeted me as soon as I opened the back door. But this time, there was nothing, just an unsettling stillness. My heart sank the moment I stepped outside. My once beautiful pond was unrecognizable. Thick slabs of wet concrete covered its surface, oozing into the water like gray molasses. The vibrant orange and white fish that had darted playfully just the day before now floated lifelessly, their tiny bodies trapped beneath the heavy weight of the cement. It was a scene straight out of a nightmare, except it was real. And it was happening right in my backyard. I stood frozen, staring at the destruction, trying to process what I was seeing. Who could do something like this? And why? The answer came faster than I expected. As if on cue, Karen appeared on her side of the fence, arms crossed and lips curled into a smug smile. She didn't even try to hide her satisfaction. "You should have listened when I told you to get rid of that thing," she said, her voice dripping with condescension. "Now look what happens." Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. How could someone be so cruel? This wasn't just vandalism. It felt personal. Every fish in that pond had been carefully chosen, each one a small piece of joy in my life. Now they were gone, wiped out because of some twisted power trip. Anger bubbled inside me, but I forced myself to stay calm. Losing my temper wouldn't fix anything. Instead, I walked over to the fence and looked her directly in the eye. "Why would you do this?" I asked, my voice trembling. "What did I ever do to you?" Karen shrugged, feigning indifference. "It's not about you. It's about keeping our neighborhood beautiful. That pond was an eyesore, and you refused to listen." An eyesore? Was she serious? I wanted to scream, to demand answers. But deep down, I knew it wouldn't make a difference. Karen thrived on control, and no amount of reasoning, or yelling, was going to change her mind. As I turned away from her, tears stinging my eyes, I realized something important. Karen wasn't going to stop. If I let this slide, she'd only escalate things further. She'd push until she got exactly what she wanted. A neighborhood that mirrored her vision, no matter who got hurt in the process. But giving in wasn't an option. My pond might have been destroyed, but my spirit wasn't. Watching Karen stand there, gloating like she'd won some kind of victory, made me realize something else. I couldn't let her get away with this, not without consequences. That's when the idea began to form in my mind. It started as a flicker, a tiny spark of rebellion. What if I gave Karen a taste of her own medicine? Something bold enough to shake her out of her self-righteous bubble. Something that would remind her what it feels like to lose control. At first, the thought scared me. Retaliation wasn't really my style. I preferred peace over conflict, quiet evenings by the pond over confrontations. But this wasn't just about me anymore. It was about standing up for myself, for my home, and for anyone else who might end up in Karen's crosshairs. By the time I went back inside, the spark had grown into a flame. I didn't know yet how I'd pull it off, but one thing was certain. Karen had underestimated me. Big time. The idea of getting back at Karen felt both thrilling and terrifying. On one hand, it was empowering to think about turning the tables on her. On the other, I wasn't exactly a mastermind when it came to revenge plots. I spent hours pacing around the house, trying to figure out how to make Karen understand what it felt like to lose something she valued. That's when my eyes landed on the bags of leftover cement mixed, stacked in the corner of the garage. It had been sitting there for months, remnants from a DIY project I'd started but never finished. At first glance, it seemed almost poetic, using the same material she'd used to destroy my pond to teach her a lesson. But as tempting as the thought was, I knew I couldn't just wing it. This had to be done carefully, methodically. If I messed up, Karen would have all the ammunition she needed to turn the entire neighborhood against me. I turned to the internet for guidance, diving into forums and videos about mixing and pouring concrete. It sounded simple enough. Add water, stir, pour, let it set. Easy, right? Except nothing is ever that straightforward when you're planning something this risky. Every detail mattered, from timing to cleanup. I even practiced in secret, experimenting with small batches late at night to get the consistency just right. The last thing I wanted was for the plan to fail because the concrete didn't harden properly or look suspicious. While preparing, I also had to keep up appearances. Karen's sharp eyes were always watching, so I made sure to act normal during the day. I watered my plants, waved politely whenever she walked by, and avoided doing anything that might raise suspicion. Inside, though, my mind raced with possibilities. Would she freak out when she saw what I'd done? Would she finally realize how far over the line she'd gone? One thing kept me going, imagining her reaction. Karen prided herself on perfection, her pristine car, her immaculate yard, her spotless reputation. Taking away even a piece of that facade would hit her where it hurt most. And honestly, part of me hoped it would teach her a lesson about empathy. Maybe seeing things from someone else's perspective would change her behavior, or at least tone down her bossiness. As the days passed, anticipation built inside me like a pressure cooker ready to burst. I checked the weather forecast obsessively, waiting for the perfect night. A dark, moonless evening when no one would be outside. When the ideal conditions finally lined up, I felt a strange mix of nerves and excitement. This wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about reclaiming control. For weeks, Karen had dictated how I should live my life, making me feel small and powerless. Now, I was taking that power back. On the chosen night, I double-checked everything. Gloves, wheelbarrow, cement bags, flashlight. My heart pounded as I loaded everything into the garage, knowing there was no turning back once I stepped outside. As I stood in the shadows of my driveway, looking toward Karen's gleaming Audi parked neatly in her own, I whispered to myself, "This is for the fish." For better or worse, I was ready. The night of the operation was darker than I'd anticipated. Not a single star lit up the sky, and the moon was nowhere to be seen, perfect for what I had planned. My hand shook slightly as I grabbed the wheelbarrow and the first bag of cement, my breath visible in the cold air. Every sound seemed louder than usual. The crunch of gravel under my shoes, the rustle of leaves in the breeze. For a moment, I hesitated, wondering if this was really such a good idea. But then I thought about my pond, the fish, and Karen's smug smile, and any doubt vanished. I moved quickly but carefully, sticking to the shadows as I crossed the gap between our driveways. Karen's Audi sat gleaming under the dim glow of a nearby streetlight, looking every bit as polished and perfect as its owner. It almost felt wrong to mess with something so pristine. Almost. I reminded myself that this wasn't just random mischief, it was justice. Once I reached the car, I set the wheelbarrow down and got to work. The cement mix came alive as I added water, turning into a thick gray paste that smelled faintly earthy. I worked quietly, stirring with steady motions to avoid making noise. Each scoop felt symbolic, like I was pouring not just concrete, but all my frustration, anger, and sadness into the task. By the time I started spreading it around the tires, a sense of calm determination had settled over me. The wet cement flowed smoothly, encasing the wheels and creeping up the sides of the car like molten stone. Watching it spread gave me a strange kind of satisfaction. This wasn't destruction, it was balance. Karen had taken something precious from me, and now she'd know how it felt. As the car became more and more trapped, I couldn't help but admire my handiwork. It looked absurd yet strangely fitting, a monument to her arrogance, frozen in place. When the last bit of cement was poured, I stepped back to take it all in. The Audi was completely immobilized, locked in a solid block of gray. It was surreal, almost comical, but also deeply satisfying. For the first time since the pond incident, I felt like I could breathe again. Cleaning up took longer than expected. I wiped down the wheelbarrow, double-checked for footprints, and made sure no evidence was left behind. My gloves went straight into a garbage bag, which I sealed tightly before tossing it deep into the trash can. As I slipped back inside my house, adrenaline still coursing through my veins, I allowed myself a small smile. Phase 1 was complete. The real test would come in the morning, when Karen discovered her car. Would she scream, cry, call the police? I didn't know, and part of me didn't care. What mattered was that she'd finally understand what it felt like to lose control. And maybe, just maybe, she'd think twice before crossing anyone else in the neighborhood. As I climbed into bed, I replayed the night's events in my mind, reliving each step with a mix of pride and nervousness. Whatever happened next, I knew one thing for sure. Karen's reign of terror might have just met its match. The next morning, I woke up earlier than usual, my heart racing before I even opened my eyes. I crept to the window, peeking through the blinds to catch a glimpse of Karen's reaction. It didn't take long. Within minutes of stepping outside, she spotted her car, or rather, what was now a concrete sculpture with an Audi-shaped core. Her scream shattered the quiet of the neighborhood like a fire alarm going off in an empty hallway. "Oh my goodness," she shrieked, stomping around her driveway like a toddler throwing a tantrum. "What is this? Who did this? This is outrageous. I bit my lip to keep from laughing as I watched her pace back and forth, phone glued to her ear. She called tow truck companies, insurance agents, and even the local news station, or so it sounded. Neighbors began emerging from their homes, drawn by the commotion. Some stood at a distance, whispering behind cupped hands, while others lingered closer, pretending to check their mail or water their plants, but clearly eager for front-row seats to the drama. Karen was livid. She paced in circles, gesturing wildly as she talked on the phone. "This is vandalism. This is personal. Someone here knows something," she declared, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. Her gaze swept across the crowd, landing briefly on me as I leaned casually against my porch railing, sipping coffee. I gave her a polite smile, feigning concern. "Are you okay, Karen?" I called out, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Do you need help?" Her jaw tightened, and for a moment I thought she might explode right then and there. But instead, she forced a tight-lipped smile and waved dismissively. "I'm fine," she snapped. "But this isn't over." It wasn't hard to guess what came next. By noon, 2 police officers showed up at my door. They introduced themselves politely, explaining they were investigating recent neighborhood disputes and needed to ask a few questions. I invited them in, playing the part of the cooperative homeowner perfectly. "Can you tell us where you were last night between midnight and 2 a.m.?" one officer asked, pen poised over his notepad. I shrugged innocently. "Oh, I was home all night. Just catching up on some reading, actually." I gestured toward the book sitting on my coffee table, conveniently left open to a random page. "Why do you ask?" They exchanged glances but didn't press further. Without concrete evidence, or any witnesses willing to speak up, they couldn't pin anything on me. After a few more generic questions, they thanked me for my time and left. As soon as the door closed behind them, I exhaled a shaky breath. That had been close. Too close. But Karen wasn't ready to give up. Over the next few days, anonymous complaints flooded the HOA office, each targeting me specifically. Noise violations, landscaping infractions, parking issues. You name it, she filed it. Fines piled up faster than I could pay them, and every letter that arrived in the mail felt like another shot fired in our escalating war. Still, I refused to back down. If Karen wanted a fight, she'd get one. But as the tension grew thicker, I couldn't shake the feeling that this battle was far from over. The war between Karen and me quickly turned into a game of one-upmanship, each of us determined to outdo the other. Every complaint she filed against me was met with a subtle, but unmistakable, act of retaliation on my part. It wasn't about winning anymore, it was about survival. And if Karen thought I'd roll over and play nice, she had another thing coming. One afternoon, as I sat on my porch sipping lemonade, I noticed her mailbox sitting proudly at the edge of her driveway. Inspiration struck like lightning. That evening, while Karen was out running errands, I snuck over and filled her mailbox with glitter. Not just a handful, either. I dumped an entire container of the sparkly stuff inside. The next morning, when she opened it to retrieve her mail, a glittery explosion erupted all over her hands, face, and clothes. She let out a shriek loud enough to wake the dead. Neighbors giggled behind closed doors, though no one dared admit they'd seen anything. But Karen didn't stop there. Her response came in the form of yet another anonymous complaint to the HOA, this time claiming my dog barked incessantly at night. Never mind that my dog was a quiet golden retriever who slept through thunderstorms. The HOA sent me a stern warning letter, complete with a hefty fine. I seethed but kept my cool, knowing better than to give her the satisfaction of seeing me crack under pressure. My next move involved a motion-activated sprinkler. I rigged it up near the side of my house facing Karen's porch, ensuring it would only activate when someone stepped onto her property line. Sure enough, a few days later, I heard a yelp followed by furious stomping. When I peeked outside, Karen stood dripping wet, glaring daggers at me from across the fence. "This isn't funny," she yelled, shaking water off her arms. I simply smiled sweetly and waved. Sorry about that. Must be a loose connection. Neighbors began taking sides, whispering behind closed doors about whose antics were more ridiculous. Some cheered me on quietly, sneaking knowing smiles whenever Karen stormed past them. Others distanced themselves entirely, unwilling to get caught in the crossfire. But everyone agreed on one thing. Maplewood Acres had never been this entertaining. Despite the chaos, I couldn't deny the toll it was taking. Stress gnawed at me constantly, and sleep became elusive. Every knock on the door made my heart race, wondering if it was another officer or HOA representative. Yet, through it all, I refused to back down. Giving in would mean letting Karen win, and that was something I couldn't stomach. Still, I couldn't help but wonder how long this could go on. Each new prank or complaint pushed us closer to a breaking point. How far would Karen take things? And what would happen if she decided to escalate beyond petty grievances? For now, though, I held my ground, determined to show her, and myself, that I wasn't someone to be pushed around. As much as I hated to admit it, this battle wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about proving that kindness and fairness still mattered, even in a world where people like Karen tried to bulldoze their way to the top. And deep down, I hoped that somewhere beneath her rigid exterior, she might finally understand the damage she caused. The turning point came during an emergency HOA meeting called to address the growing tension in the neighborhood. Word had spread about Karen's antics, and mine, and people were divided. Some supported her strict enforcement of rules, while others thought she'd gone too far. The room buzzed with whispered conversations as residents filed in, glancing nervously at each other. It felt like a courtroom drama, and I couldn't help but feel like I was on trial. Karen sat at the front table, looking every bit the part of someone defending their territory. Her usual air of superiority was tinged with desperation now, her lips pressed into a thin line as she scanned the crowd. When it was her turn to speak, she launched into a lengthy speech about maintaining community standards and how my actions, never mind hers, were disrupting the harmony of Maplewood Acres. She didn't mention the concrete pond or the glitter bombs directly, but everyone knew what she was talking about. When it was my turn to respond, I kept things simple and calm. I acknowledged the disagreements between Karen and me, but emphasized that retaliation wasn't productive for anyone. We're neighbors, I said, looking around the room. And no matter what happens, we still have to live next to each other. Wouldn't it be better if we found a way to move forward peacefully? My words seemed to resonate with some of the attendees, especially those who'd grown tired of Karen's constant complaints. A few nodded in agreement, while others shifted uncomfortably in their seats. For the first time, I saw cracks in Karen's armor. Her confidence wavered as she realized not everyone was on her side anymore. After hours of heated debate, a compromise emerged. Karen would step down as HOA president, but remain on the board. In exchange, she agreed to drop all pending complaints against me. It wasn't perfect, but it was enough to restore some semblance of peace. As the meeting adjourned, I noticed Karen lingering by the door, avoiding eye contact with nearly everyone. Her reign of control was officially over. In the weeks that followed, life slowly returned to normal, or as close to normal as it could get after everything that had happened. I cleaned up my yard, fixed the sprinkler system, and even replaced my old pond with a smaller, above-ground version. It wasn't the same, but it brought me joy again. Meanwhile, Karen kept to herself, rarely venturing outside except to water her plants or take out the trash. Rumor had it she donated her cement-blocked Audi to charity rather than deal with the hassle of removing it. Looking back, I realized this whole ordeal taught me something important. Standing up for yourself doesn't mean stooping to someone else's level. Yes, I played along with Karen's games for a while, but in the end, choosing peace over conflict made all the difference. Our neighborhood wasn't perfect, but it was ours, and sometimes that's enough. As I sat by my new pond one evening, watching the sun dip below the horizon, I felt a sense of closure wash over me. The battle may have been messy, but it reminded me of something crucial. kindness always wins, even when it feels like the odds are stacked against you. And if Karen ever decided to start fresh, well, maybe there'd be room for forgiveness then. But until that day came, I was content knowing I'd fought for what mattered and won.